Right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to SAA Student Chapters, formerly February, now March event with Brenda Gunn. Thank you all for joining us. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. So this is Revolutions or Evolutions, Perspectives on Progress in Archivy. Oh. Uh-oh. So just a reminder to preserve bandwidth, mute your mic, turn off your video. As we're going along, go ahead and ask questions in the chat. We'll do a Q&A at the end of the presentation. This presentation is being recorded. It will be posted to our YouTube channel. I'm Katrina. I didn't start with that. The Vice Chair of San Jose State Student Chapter of SAA. And tonight we are talking with Brenda Gunn. She is the Associate University Librarian for Special Collections at University of Virginia. She is a certified archivist who focuses on compassion and care in the archival workplace. Currently, she's co-PI on the Mellon Foundation-funded project on these grounds, which is creating a descriptive model to represent the enslaved lives who labored to build colleges and universities. Additionally, she is a partner on the Archival Revolutions Project, which explores the transformative practices, theories, ideas of the last 40 years in archivy. So, welcome, Brenda Gunn.
Thank you, Katrina, for that introduction, and hello, everyone. It's good to be here with you. I'm all the way over on the East Coast. Maybe some of you are on the East Coast. I'm not sure, but I'm coming to you from Charlottesville, Virginia. And I want to thank Hannah Holzhauser. I'm not sure if she's in the room, but I think this opportunity for me came from an interview that I did with her for a class. And I want to thank the student chapter for extending the invitation to speak, and Katrina in particular, who worked with me to get the February meeting scheduled and then worked with me again to reschedule at the last minute. And I do appreciate the understanding that Katrina and all of you have provided me when I had to cancel at the last minute in February. I really appreciate it. So I'm going to share my screen. Oh, shoot. I should have put that up earlier. Now you don't have much time to admire this opening screen. Here we go. As Katrina said, I'm at the University of Virginia right now, and I've been in an academic setting for most of my career. And before Virginia, I was at the University of Texas, where I earned my master's in library and information science with a certification in archival enterprise. And I was a member of the UT Austin student chapter, which was the second one to receive a charter from SAA. So that was a really meaningful experience for me as a student. And so it makes talking with all of you tonight really special for me. I want to talk about my work as a co-investigator of the Archival Revolutions Project, but before I get to that, I want to spend just a little bit of time on the Archives and Society initiative from the early to mid 80s. And because my co-researcher and I situate the Archival Revolutions Project in that initiative, and specifically with David Gracie, who was the initiator of it. And then from there, I want to share with you what I see are critical conversations and active actions and progress in the field right now. And I see these as continuing to be relevant and perhaps revolutionary in the years to come. And finally, I'll end with a nod to important new projects, some of which have been recently announced. But first, before we begin in earnest, I'll begin with a land acknowledgement for the University of Virginia Library. I gather we're coming together in this space from different parts of the country. I'm here in Central Virginia, as I said. So in Charlottesville and at the University of Virginia Library, we acknowledge that the land where we learn and work is the ancestral homeland and traditional territory of the Monacan Indian Nation. We pay respect to their elders and knowledge keepers, both past and present. We acknowledge and pay respect to the enslaved Africans, enslaved laborers, and free Black laborers who built UVA, as well as their descendants. Today, we acknowledge the land, the labor, traditions and knowledge, and I acknowledge lives. So here we are, the first archival revolution. This address by David B. Gracie was the inspiration for the Archival Revolutions Project. So I'll begin here. In 1983, Gracie was the incoming president of the Society of American Archivists. And in this address, in which he titled The First Archival Revolution, he identified and articulated problems as he saw them in the field. Number one, that archival repositories were poorly resourced, not just financially, but also in staffing levels. The image of archivists in the public's mind was not a good one. It wasn't that the public had a negative image in mind, it was that they didn't have one at all. A little idea about archives and what archivists did, and little care to change it, Gracie said. The same could be said for archival archives as a body of material. As president, he said that October in '83, he would create a task force that focused on archives and society. And that initiative would, number one, draft a statement on the value of archives to society, would develop ways of raising awareness of, appreciation for, and understanding of archival work, and would identify the highest priorities for SAA to work on. Gracie used strong words to stimulate conversation and action, especially to get archivists thinking about their image and what they could do to change it. This is, there is an I in archives, you are the I. This comes from one of the awareness raising efforts that the Task Force on Archives and Society put together in the mid-'80s. This was from a brochure that was intended to be distributed as widely as possible amongst the in and amongst the public, and to get them to recognize that archives was about them and it did concern them and it had an impact on them when they weren't there. The task force that Gracie created during his presidency was named for his signature initiative, Archives and Society, and it continued for several years past his term in office. And one of the most significant outcomes was the creation of the Committee on Public Information, which is now COPA, or the Committee on Public Affairs. And that happened in 1988. Throughout his career, Gracie continued to write about advocacy and the image of archivists. And I wanted to note that Anthony Dunbar, in his important article, Introducing Critical Race Theory into Archival Discourse, which was published in 2006, identified Archives and Society Initiative as the point at which social justice work becomes part of the archival conversation in our field, and that's continued to intensify. So here we come to the Archival Revolutions Project. Gracie's framework that the image of the archivist, a focus on the relationship between the archivist and the public as a revolution, begged the question, what are the subsequent revolutions? What are the second, third, and fourth? So I got Stephen Booth interested in this question, and he and I embarked on the research project. We received some funding from the Society of American Archivists Foundation, and we've been recognized by the Council of Library and Information Resources for their Pocket Burgundy publication series. We're real excited about that. We used Gracie's Revolution framework as a jumping off point. And the project seeks to examine the last 40 years of archival history to identify revolutions that have shifted paradigms and changed theories practices, and perceptions. So the methodologies that we've used, first of all, we received approval from the University of Virginia's Institutional Review Board, which was important to receive funding from the foundation. We held 9 focus group sessions in the fall of 2021, specifically September and October. And each of those sessions were 1 hour in length, and they were facilitated by both Stephen and me. We had 42 memory workers who participated out of around 70 who answered the call for volunteers. We wanted these, the focus groups to be, to have a variety of people and a variety of backgrounds. We were pleased that we were able to put together sessions that were multi-generational, that had people from various geographical locations, and that had diverse backgrounds and life experiences. We recorded the sessions and we transcribed all of them, and we worked from the transcriptions using grounded theory methodology to analyze the information we gathered. The information came from 4 questions that we asked each group. What are the archival revolutions that you think since the 1983 Gracie's article? What revelations may still be underway? Are there revolutions that didn't succeed? And finally, how do you define an archival revolution? So, needless to say that the focus groups never lacked for any conversation. They were full and rich and really wonderful. People came with ideas and opinions, and all of it was great. And the first pass through the information we gathered yielded about 17 themes, which we're not going to continue with. We're working now to narrow those down. But you can look to see that we had quite a range. Some of these we anticipated, some we hadn't. And after the focus group sessions, we could look back and see the criticality of having memory workers who represented every decade of this time period, because it seemed that responses were tied to when you came into the field and your experiences from that point on. So we're working with 5, what we are calling buckets, 5 buckets or thematic buckets. And the first is technology. We've, many of the 17 themes we found could be merged into one, collapsed into one. So technology is the first one that we're looking at, and we're defining these as we go. And for us, we're meaning infrastructure, hardware, software, and equipment. And our participants talked about changes brought about by computers, brought about by the internet and the World Wide Web. They mentioned proliferation of data and obsolescence of media, to name just a few. The second thematic bucket is theoretical, and we're dealing here where ideation happens, where concepts are talked about and introduced, where archival theories are talked about and broached in this area. We heard from our focus group participants about frameworks like documentation strategy and ethics of care. We heard about the decolonization of archives as a theoretical concept, as opposed to other conversations about decolonizations which capture the activity around it. And we heard concepts like belonging and empathy. This was a very rich area of conversation in those focus group sessions. We also heard, and we were anticipating a lot of the things that we heard in this area, information about practice and the practical. We always have that, that duality of theoretical and practical, and the tension right there in the in the middle, the overlap and the tension. So we're really thinking about procedures and guidelines and policies and tools that are created and that we use here in the course of doing our work. Some of the things that the focus group wanted to talk about was more product, less process, encoded archival description, DAX. Some of the archivists who had been around for a little bit longer were there when Mark Format came into play. We heard about tools like Archive Space and Archivist Toolkit and Aon, and then we heard people talk about guidelines, various guidelines that that come down. There was a lot of talk too about SAA and the development of SAA, the growth of SAA, and that often branched out into the field. So it wasn't just the association itself and the running of the association, but its impact on the field and the field more broadly. So in this area where we're looking at associations, national and regional, we're looking at certification. The Academy of Certified Archivists was created during this time, and actually, as part of the Archives in Society initiative, it came out of that. And this concept of professionalism, and what does that mean? That came up quite a bit. Some of the things that we heard was the rise of professional literature. For instance, the early fundamental series, which were now SAA is now on the third iteration of the fundamental series. But the first group of fundamentals came out during this period. I mentioned certification, the rise of student chapters, excuse me, professional growth like the Archives Leadership Institute, Camp Pitt, which was a leadership institute for electronic records archivists, which was a model for ALI. Education, I mentioned the growth of SAA, and some participants talked about the establishment of the diversity committee as a big growth point for SAA. Mentoring programs and generational transformations were other topics that came up. And then the last bucket that we're working with right now, we're not promising that we're going to keep it to 5 because we still have some other areas that are hanging out there, and we're not sure if they're going to fit into these 5 or if we need to make a 6. But we're seeing a cultural and societal thematic area where people are talking about ideas, and they're talking about customs and social behavior that come into the field from the outside, and norms that that we inherit in our workplaces, in the field. Some of the things that were talked about and that we heard about was that darn list. So communications in a social media sort of setting, archives and climate change, the hidden collection movement, which hidden collection goes back to the early 2000s. Of course, diversity, equity, inclusion, and the archives are not neutral, and systemic issues. A lot of conversation around these areas. And then the last thing that we asked of the participants was to give us an idea about the definitions of revolution. After having the conversation around the 3 previous questions, we were interested in hearing what they might think the revolution would be in an archival context. And so we heard a variety of things, including the question of whether we're talking about evolution or is it really revolution? And and that's something that we're grappling with, Stephen and I, and we haven't quite got there in terms of analysis and our thinking. to be able to share anything with you today. If you have thoughts, you can certainly put them in the chat. We're happy to hear what your thinking is on it. But it's definitely something that we'll be addressing for the publication. So the conversation around it got a variety of thoughts and answers. There's a change involved in a revolution, a change in direction. There is an identity that's for some that seems to be an element in a revolution. If there's an upheaval, there's something that is turning things upside down. There's an emotional factor for some where you're invested emotionally in the work that all of a sudden maybe is changing and changing for going forward. For some, there's a revolution comes out of a necessity, something that's needed in the profession. Revolution may involve a breaking point, a very distinct departure and a disconnect from what's happened previously. And then for some, we heard the impact would indicate a revolution. So these are all really interesting thoughts and concepts about a revolution that we are thinking about in as we go forward. And I wanted to offer this quote from Gracie about change. Bringing change will require grassroots involvement and work by all of us. So this is part of the first Archival Revolution presentation that he gave in October of '83. And he's calling for grassroots action to change the image of the archivist here. But I think his words resonate for me, certainly, with the activism that is alive in the profession today. And I actually don't think he gets some of the credit for, putting that idea out there. So I wanted to just insert that into the conversation. So here's where we are right now. Our analysis is continuing. As I said, we have a draft of the manuscript due to clear in the fall, and we hope if everything goes according to plan, Clear will publish the Archival Revolutions Project as part of their Pocket Burgundy series in spring of 2024. So we're super excited about that. I wanted at this point to say, give my appreciations to Stephen Booth, always. He's a marvelous partner. To the SAA Foundation for providing the seed money that helped us to provide honoraria for our focus group participants. We wanted to make sure that we were giving them some compensation for their time and for their ideas. And I wanted to thank y'all, the student chapter, because you may have ideas that you would want to share. What are your ideas about Archival Revolutions that I've asked over here? And I don't think we'll take time right now to think and have you put it in chat, but if something pops into your head, I'd welcome seeing that in the chat. Ari has promised that I'll get Ari and Katrina has promised I'll get the chat later if you give me some tidbits. Wonderful. We appreciate that. And now that brings us to progress today. Here are the areas that are, where I'm most interested in, and the areas that I think are super important. Teaching with primary sources doesn't seem so revolutionary, but if you think about the time where using primary sources in teaching was really show and tells, you just bring out some pretty things and some treasures or some interesting maps, and that was the sum total of your teaching. And it's quite different now. And so that's really interesting to me and to us at the University of Virginia, where we put a lot of time and effort into our instruction program. I'm also really interested in the literature and the conversations around radical empathy and ethics of care. Trauma-informed practice is another one that we're spending quite a bit of time thinking about in the special collections at UVA. Reparations, we're trying to operationalize reparative work, as I'm sure many repositories and archivists are doing the same. And then the work that's doing on that we're doing as the field on community archives is really inspiring, and there's some fantastic work and support from foundations in this area. And so I have another question here for you is, what does progress look like to you? What are the meaningful things and topics that you're interested in as not only as students, but as emerging professionals in this field? So you feel free to put that in the chat as well. I'd love to hear your thoughts. So if you'll indulge me, I wanted to spend a little time with this research that my colleague Crystal Appia and I did on an Ithaca SNR project. I mentioned that we're very invested in instruction with primary sources at the University of Virginia, and we have many course sessions over each semester. So we were interested in this project in knowing how we could improve our services to faculty. And the other thing that was interesting to me is that they weren't, the idea wasn't to go to faculty who weren't using, it wasn't an advocacy thing. Ithaca wanted to know why faculty are using primary sources, how they're using them, and from that information, how can we improve our services to them? So that was very intriguing to Crystal and to me. And so the University of Virginia joined about 26 other colleges and universities that participated in the project. The study examined the pedagogical practices of humanities and social science instructors who are already teaching, as I said, at the undergraduate level. We weren't interested in graduate courses. We interviewed 14 instructors, and that was the upper limit as defined by Ithaca. And we reported our results locally, and we submitted our findings to Ithaca, who compiled and aggregated the results and the reports from all of the participating institutions. So we heard a number of things that faculty valued. They valued the knowledge and expertise of staff in special collections, subject liaisons, and in teaching and learning units. They valued the ability to augment their own gaps in primary source training. We heard almost every interviewee lamented not getting the kind of training that they wanted to provide for their students. So they were still learning from these sessions as well. They valued the partnership with special collections and archivists in creating the assignments and projects with primary sources, again, moving away from just the show and tell, where students are just looking and not really engaging. They value being able to bring information literacy and analytical skills. These are major themes and learning goals of the colleges that they are working in, mainly arts and sciences at the University of Virginia. But these are transferable skills, and they know that they can use primary sources to ask their students to evaluate and assess information in those sources. And as I said, a particular liberal arts goal is to build skill sets beyond any one course or discipline. And the faculty we interviewed really valued that ability. And we also heard time and time again how much faculty and students enjoyed coming to special collections and engaging with the material. Even with the hesitation that students had over coming into special collections, when they left, they were sold, they had a great time, they had a meaningful experience, and they had joy. Okay, so the themes that we wrote about. So we took all of this information, we used grounded methodology to analyze this information, just like we're doing for the Archival Revolutions Project. And we came up with these thematic areas. Number one, I don't know that we were surprised to hear this. I think that we were appreciative to hear that faculty were very aware of gaps in our collections. They were aware of silences and the need to repair. And they talked about using this as part of their instruction to their students. So like reading against the grain is one of the things that they do in teaching their students how to use archival material. Primary sources, filling in the gaps, and textbooks and course materials also fits in this area. They talked a lot about pedagogy, the structuring of lessons using primary source material. They talked about, and this was specific to our collections, and I imagine the other participants heard similar things. We heard a lot of things about the strengths of our collection, but we also heard what we don't have and where they had to go to find those things. We're not a comprehensive repository, so we don't hit every discipline by any stretch of the imagination. So some of the faculty members have to use digital material. So they talked to us about accessibility, and that was a really good conversation to hear. We heard a lot about materiality, and this was really wonderful to hear, and it kind of offset the previous conversation about, well, you don't have this, and I can get it in digital form from the Digital Library of America, but I really want my students to experience the original material. So this is the point at which Crystal and I are looking at each other and are going like this, because we entered into this research thinking we're going to hear digitization or original. But what we heard over and over again was digitization and original. The faculty want both. They see the convenience, they see in some cases the necessity of going to digital resources, but they also want their students to have the experience of the material, the object, to interact with the paper or the book or the textile. So this was a really fun area for us to write about materiality. Again, the importance of staff and the expertise of the archival staff. That was appreciated, and it was recognized as a theme because the faculty, and this was really gratifying, saw the archivists and the librarians as partners in this endeavor. And then another theme was goals, like learning objectives and things like that. Our recommendations in our report was that we should acknowledge that archives aren't neutral. And we heard that from the faculty. They know that, and they're teaching their students that. So let's be transparent about it. Another recommendation is to actively promote the use of primary sources. So this research was for faculty who already use it. So we want to use what we've learned and promote it to faculty who maybe haven't been in before. And I like this because it gets back to the Gracie advocacy activism challenge. We're recommending that we examine the student engagement with the primary source material, and what we learn from that engagement examination, and then assessments can help us improve the job that we're doing. And recommending having articulated goals for every instruction session that we do. Now, back to progress. Thank you for that. That report is actually published online. If anyone's interested in reading it, or interested in reading the Ithaca compilation, you can let me know, and I can get you that information. Progress continued. Radical empathy and ethics of care. As I said, there's so much good work going on here, and the literature in this area is growing. You've got people writing about it, presenting about it, workshops about it. It's just a really rich and robust area, and it's good to see. Had it not been for the professional conversations around these topics, and using this literature and having conversations at work about empathy and care over the last 5 years, our response to the November murders of 5 student athletes at UVA would have been very different. Rather than stand up immediately, a collecting effort in order to document this tragedy, the murders of the students, we chose to pay attention and participate in the collective grieving that was going on campus, and to remain a part and present in that, and to be aware of how we and our coworkers and our larger community was doing in this extremely difficult time. We made a few inquiries to other departments to let them know we were interested in bringing in material, particularly related to the university's response. But we didn't advertise any collecting efforts. We didn't publicize it. We didn't contact the parents. We did a real about face from 5 years before, when after the Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville in 2017, where in the aftermath of that, the library did do a very aggressive launch an aggressive documentation. And the people who were involved in that later said, this happened to us in our community, it happened to us in our library, and we didn't get to participate in a grieving process because we were busy doing this other thing. So I credit this area of our field and the literature for really changing the way we approached and responded to that event last November. Trauma-informed practice also played a big part in our response too, and I am super interested in this area. We've formed a trauma-informed practice interest group at work, and we have people who it's a volunteer thing, and interestingly, we have people from every unit of special collections who are interested in this topic. So, and it makes sense because it reaches out and can have an impact in all of the areas like reference, text services and archival processing and cataloging, preservation and outreach and instruction. It touches every area of what we do. We're particularly interested in designing a trauma-informed reading room, and we've been working with the university's contemplative practices faculty to design a reading room that is doesn't contribute to anyone's trauma, and we hope can help ease it during the time that they're in our reading room. Oops. Reparations. I can't say enough about the seminal work of Lael Hughes Watkins and her 2017 article on reparative archives. Operationalizing what it means to repair and to rebuild is activism on the job. And we're trying to be transparent in job descriptions about the kind of work that we're doing and the kind of work you should expect to do if you come to work for us. We're modeling being clear in collection development strategies. We're not the only ones that are incorporating that, but we're certainly trying to articulate very clearly and being transparent about the repair work that we're doing. We want to seize opportunities in our outreach activities to correct narratives that are harmful, hurtful, and wrong. For instance, we in 2021 had a major exhibit called Taking of the Land, and it started out as the title, I think, was The English Colonization of Virginia. And from that title, you can tell that the curator was looking at or wanted to use our materials to tell a very traditional colonizer story. And we changed that to incorporate Native American voices and to tell the story from their perspective, which was where we get Taking of the Land. It was taken from them. And we used a Virginia history textbook circa 1970s and hired a woman named Ashley Spivey, who is an enrolled member of the Pamunkey Indian tribe, to edit the Virginia history textbook to reflect, the Native American perspective. And it was a phenomenal piece of narrative correction, and it was the most impactful piece of that exhibition. Moving on to archives and climate change, like David Gracie in 1983, getting archivists wound up to be changing their own image. Era Tanzi and colleagues are working to raise the alarm for archivists everywhere to make sustainability plans for their collections, as well as to understand their repositories and their collections' vulnerabilities to the changing of the climate, the rising of sea levels, the intensifying of storms, which could lead to flooding. But of course, we know disaster preparedness and disaster recovery, which is part of this conversation, can come from a pipe being burst. So there's a preservation conversation that's going on here, which extends to sustainable environmental preservation, which is a fascinating area of looking at what we can do to lower our carbon footprint in our storage areas and in our buildings. Community archives, of course, great work going on in this area too, is getting support from major foundations. I'm thinking of the UC Irvine Mellon Grant, which is centering training students to steward their community's archives. Looking forward, indigenizing archival practice. This is one of the most exciting projects I think that's coming along, and it's funded by Mellon. It's an SAA project, and it's going to center Indigenous needs and perspectives in archival practice. So in other words, reframe Western created practice to meet Indigenous communities' needs. I just mentioned a great project centering community archives work, but I'll also call out the Blackivists, a group of Black archivists based in Chicago that are building community or helping communities build archives in that area. NAFAN, the National Archival Finding Aid Network. Boy, wouldn't it be a dream to have one place for people to go to find our material? So that's an interesting project that's ongoing. On these grounds, and the use of linked open data in targeted descriptive work is something to continue to watch, and as continued activism and advocacy on a number of fronts. My final thought is another David Gracie wonderful quote. And in thinking about activity and activism, I think of this, and we must begin somewhere, let it be here, and we must begin sometime, let it be now. I want to thank you so much for your attention during this time, and if you have questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Oops, there. Should I stop sharing, you think?
Yeah, let's go back to our.
Yeah.
Perfect. So if you do have a question, go ahead and unmute yourself and jump in. Or we have a new question in the chat. What aspects of your reading room did you feel perpetuated trauma, and what did you do to mitigate it?
Oh, I'm sorry. Say that again.
What aspects of your reading room did you feel perpetrated trauma, and what did you do to mitigate it?
Have you all heard of the article by Ashley Farmer, and it's called Archiving While Black? It was very influential for me. We talk about it in our workplace quite a bit, and Ashley Farmer is a historian at the University of Texas, and in this article she writes about being a Black woman working in spaces where she doesn't feel welcome or she doesn't feel like she belongs. And she says that it could come from her interactions with staff, but often it comes from what's in the reading room itself. And she describes sitting in a reading room where you've got portraits of white founding fathers, and I thought she could be talking about the University of Virginia's Special Collections reading room. We don't have founding fathers, but we do have portraits of white men who had given money to the archives or had given a collection. So, you're sitting there, you're trying to do your work, and it could be traumatic in and of itself. You could be looking through records of enslavement. You could be looking through violence against LGBTQ students. You could be looking at any number of things which could call up, which are traumatic in and of themselves, or call up trauma in your own personal history. And then to have the setting that you're in contribute to that is really kind of the gist of her article. And it made us think about and look at our reading room with a different lens. And so we've changed some of the things that we have hanging in there, and we have a plan to put a different collection of pictures. So take down the portraits and put up something else that's related to students or student work, and that doesn't have this oppressive feel to it. And the University of Virginia, it's Thomas Jefferson is very much in the air, and as is sort of the a plantation look with the white columns and that sort of thing. So it's sometimes a difficult space, a challenging space for people to enter. And so we want our reading room not to be one of those places. We want people come there to do research there, which is important to them, and we don't want there to be any distractions. We want it to be a contemplative place, contemplative in terms of knowledge creation and thinking. Is there another one?
Oh, thank you for sharing that article.
Yeah, it's not a long article. I would encourage you all to read it if you get a chance. You can just Google it, Ashley Farmer, Archivy Black. It was published in several areas. Okay.
Does anyone else have any other comments on what revolutions they've observed or what progress has looked like?
I see some thoughts here about what progress, so I appreciate those. Very exciting. I meet with Stephen. We have meetings every 2 weeks where we continue to work on the analysis and incorporating some of the participants' comments into those thematic buckets. So I'm excited to share your thoughts here. I agree, Lindsay. I agree. Standards, and talking about Heather's comment, standards is, I guess by its very definition, it doesn't allow for a lot of flexibility, really, does it? So it does seem like it's very antithetical. And it's interesting, some of the participants who were archivists at the beginning of their careers in the 70s and 80s, when standards were really, especially descriptive standards, were really being worked on and becoming a thing. They described some real good fights in the profession at SAA. Like, well, can we talk about that? Oh no, that's off topic, I guess. But it was, I wish we could have heard more about those, but it wasn't really what we were in the focus group session to hear about, the squabbles. But I think it's to Heather's point that when you're working on standards and being uniform, then there's always a lot of tension around that. And so trying to break out of it or change to do it differently is not an easy thing to do.
Feels a little bit like at the beginning, the classes are very much like, this is the right thing to do. This is the right way to do things. And then as you get further up, it becomes a little more gray area. Like it's not as cut and dried as you'd expect.
Right. And this makes me think of the work that Michelle Caswell is doing and some of the other faculty at the UCLA in challenging, theories that we've been operating under for, decades. And I'm thinking of appraisal theory. So Caswell's, dusting of fingerprints, where she's using the feminist ethics of care as a new appraisal theory, that's incredible, and I'm really excited about that because in her article, she provides an argument or for me, a justification for being specific about hiring diverse people in your units. So so she says that, you know, for cataloging and processing and descriptive work, it's super important to have representatives of a broad range of individuals and experiences in order to do the best for that archival material. And I don't remember anything in the literature which states it like that, which justifies that in that way. So that was very interesting to me, the way that she and Punzalan and Marika Safor and some of the colleagues that have written on those topics are really challenging status quo theories and practices. Yeah.
Gotten a couple more questions. What dialogue has there been on how community archives and institutional archives may interface or change how they interact in the future? What with historical mistrust of institutional archives often being a main reason for community archives coming about in the first place?
I'll give you a personal or a local example. I've been working with three now Virginia Indian tribes, and you know, we don't show up on their doors to say, hey, I'm Brenda the archivist and I've got all this knowledge, and don't you want to, you know, don't you want me to help you organize your stuff? No, we can't do that. We wait to be invited. And lo and behold, because we worked with Ashley Spivey, I mentioned her as the woman who edited the Virginia history textbook. Well, Dr. Spivey has a consulting business that and it's a cultural heritage consulting company, and she works a lot with tribes in Virginia, and they trust her because she is in one of the communities, the Pamunkey. And so I guess her experience with me and with the library was a fruitful one for her, was a respectful one. And she felt that she could introduce me to another tribe who was struggling with gathering their archival material and knowing what to do with it. They're trying to seek federal recognition. And so part of the documentation for that requires assembling a lot of this material. And so I was asked if I would talk to them about what I do and what we could offer at the library. And so that led to another conversation with a second Indian tribe who they have a similar question around their material, and they may be interested in storage because they don't have a cultural center, or they don't have appropriate storage or any kind of storage for the material that they're gathering. They plan to build one, so we're talking with them about perhaps storing their material in our stacks as I feel like it would be a reparative gesture. We're not asking, we would never ask them to donate or give that material. We will accept it on deposit and return it whenever they're ready and want to have that back. So those are the kind of conversations that we're having with three particular community groups. We are beginning a conversation with, oh no, we've worked with the Jefferson Center for African American History and Culture on a photography exhibit. And I hope that we've been respectful and gained some trust in that community, but it took working with a Black faculty member who teaches photography history, and he was the main curator of this exhibit, and so he really brought us into conversation with the community, larger community center, and we have 2 exhibitions in conversation with each other. So we were delighted to be able to work on that collaborative project with some community members. And we're hoping now that we can strengthen the community by commissioning some Black archivists in Charlottesville to create, and what they create is up to them, something that's in conversation with the poetry of the Harlem Renaissance, which is our next exhibit. So that's how we're working locally with community groups. But I think the Blackivist is one of it's like a gold standard for community work and helping communities stand up their own. But I don't remember who asked the question, but you're absolutely right that trust is an issue, huge issue. And there are so many ways that trust has been violated between big institutions, and I certainly include the University of Virginia as one of them. And as well-meaning as the library may have been for many years, we're still a part of the University of Virginia, and so we certainly have to answer for what others on campus may have done.
That's it. It's an important gesture on both sides to use that shared space. That is a really symbolic to be open to that as well.
Yeah. We were thrilled, and we do not take for granted that gesture and that openness.
So we're a little bit over time. There was just one more question.
Yeah.
And that was, my goal as a future archivist is to help advance queer archives or open more archives to queer material, but the process seems daunting. Do you have any advice or recommended resources?
I think that one resource that comes to mind is the section within SAA. I think it's called, they changed the name of it not too long ago, but I think it's Diverse Sexualities and Gender Archives or something like that. I'm sorry, I don't have that just right on the tip of my tongue, but I believe that you could go to that section, and the archivists in that section who are there because they share an identity, or they share a commitment to building queer archives that you are inquiring about. So I think they would be a great resource. I think that there's some literature, it may not be archival, but an interesting book on queer digital humanities is out, and it talks some about archives and building archives, or building queer digital projects, which is so that's kind of a different way to get into the subject that you're talking about, is reading about people who are using those archives for a digital humanities project. It's a good book. There are Yeah, you know, if you wanted to contact me offline, I'm just drawing a blank on other resources, but if you'll give me some time to think about it, I will come back to you. Because I know that there are already collections within repositories that are being built and are growing, and then there are community-based archives, but I can't call them to mind right now. I'm sorry. But I would like to answer your question. Brenda.Gunn@virginia.edu. There you go.
All right. I think that is a good place to stop. So thank you again to Brenda Gunn for sharing your time and your expertise with us. And thank you everyone for coming and participating in the discussion in the chat and for asking your questions. Our next event in April will be about writing and presenting. Students will be sharing their conference experiences to give everyone a better idea of how to get started on writing and presenting themselves. And our publication, Archioda, is accepting submissions. So if you have an internship or attend a talk or have something that you want to write about, please submit it to Archioda. All right. Thank you again. Thank you, Brenda. Thank you, everyone, for attending.
Thank you for the invitation. I enjoyed it a lot. If anybody's going to DC for SAA, give me a holler.